Hi everyone, and welcome back to History Calling, where I bring you new videos every Friday looking at the events of the past. Today I'll be talking to you about a fantastical room which was created for a king of Prussia, given to a Tsar of Russia, stolen by the Nazis and lost in the chaos of war. This is the story of the Amber Room, perhaps the most famous lost treasure of World War II, and the fate of which has become known as one of the world's great historical mysteries. The history of the Amber Room begins in 1701, when it was commissioned by this man, King Frederick I of Prussia. This European country no longer exists, but depending on which point in time you're talking about, it covered much of modern-day Germany and Poland. The original designer of the room was named Andreas Schluter, and after 8 years his vision had been brought to life by a number of expert workmen who could shape amber, which is hardened tree resin, and who were named Gottfried Wolfram, Gottfried Tarau and Ernest Schacht. In this case, the amber in question, like the example you see here, came from deposits in the Baltic Sea, which were over 30 million years old. In 1709, the room was complete and installed in Frederick's palace in Berlin. It was constructed from panels of amber in a variety of shades, backed with gold leaf and stretching to 16 feet high. On these panels, images had been carved, including symbols of royalty and mythological scenes. All in all, it took 6 tons of the stuff to create the room, and its contents, including vases and cutlery, were also made from amber. Frederick died in 1713, and his son Frederick William inherited his crown and the Amber Room. In 1716, Frederick William then gifted the room to Peter the Great, Tsar of Russia, in exchange for military assistance against the Swedes, and because Peter had admired it during a trip to Berlin. The room was dismantled, packed into crates and taken to St Petersburg, where it arrived in 1717. Peter, however, promptly forgot about it, and the room was put into storage for many years. Eventually, in the 1740s, during the reign of his daughter, Tsarina Elizabeth Petrovna, it was erected in the Winter Palace. Then, in 1755, she had it installed in the place where it would spend most of its known existence, Ekaterininsky Palace, or Catherine Palace, in Tsarskoye Selo, which means the Tsar's village and which is now known as Pushkin. As you can tell from these images, when the Russians built palaces, they were of the bigger is better mindset, and so the Amber Room was too small for its new surroundings. Its new location had 30 feet high ceilings, for instance, rather than 16 as the room had been designed for. The Russians therefore continued to add to it for many years to come. Under the direction of an Italian man, Bartolomeo Rastrelli, who was the chief architect of the imperial court, additional amber was brought in from Berlin, and the room was augmented by tall, slender mirrors with gilded frames. 4 marble and onyx mosaic panels from Florence, which depicted the 5 senses, were also added. These additions helped to fill in the gaps caused by the larger space the room now had to inhabit, and made it appear that the entire area was covered in amber. When all was said and done, the room covered almost 600 square feet, and by the mid-1760s included objects such as amber snuff boxes, candlesticks, and altarpieces. Tsarina Elizabeth apparently used it as a meditation space. One of her successors, Catherine the Great, preferred to use it for meetings, while another member of the Romanov dynasty, Alexander II, stored trophies in it made of, what else? Amber, which can only have added to its magnificence. At some point, it acquired the nickname the 8th Wonder of the World, apparently given to it by a British ambassador, according to an article in the Times newspaper from 1988, though I haven't seen that detail confirmed in a primary source. The room required constant care. Amber is sensitive to changes in temperature, and Catherine Palace, in the days before heating and air conditioning, could be freezing in the winter and very warm in the summer. The changes affected the amber, changing its colour and making it ever more brittle. There were multiple restorations during the 19th century, and another in 1935, when parts of the amber began to fall off the wall and had to be glued back on. With help from all of these curators and restorers, the room remained intact in the palace for nearly 200 years, surviving even the Russian Revolution of 1917. Then came World War II. On the 22nd of June 1941, on Hitler's orders, Operation Barbarossa began. This was the German invasion of Russia by over 3 million troops, and as it would turn out, it spelt disaster for the Amber Room. By the middle of September, German forces had reached St Petersburg, then known as Leningrad, which they proceeded to besiege. They had also reached the former Tsarskoye Selo, by then known as Pushkin. There were frantic attempts to evacuate the Amber Room to safety, and its movable contents, such as furniture and ornaments, were taken out. But when the curatorial staff at the Ekaterininsky Palace tried to get the amber panels off the wall, the amber began to crumble. In desperation, they covered it with gauze, cotton wool and wallpaper, hoping to evade the Nazis in that way. But it didn't work. German soldiers came in, quickly found the room, and took it apart in just a day and a half. It was packed into 27 crates and dispatched to the Prussian Fine Arts Museum in Königsberg Castle. This process of rapid dismantlement caused some damage to the room, and when it arrived in Königsberg, pieces of it were missing. More on that in a minute. But the Germans had teams of professional art curators and restorers, and the fact that the room was still in pretty good condition upon removal from Russia indicates that it was treated carefully. The Amber Room was installed in the castle under the care of the museum's director, Dr. Alfred Rode, who had something of an obsession with it. In a 1942 article in the journal Pantheon, he wrote that the Amber Room has literally and figuratively returned to its motherland, the territory of Great Germany. There is no doubt that this great masterpiece will never return to Russia, for that would be tantamount to one thing, the ruination of everything we call Great Germany. This claim that the Amber Room was German is dubious to say the least. It had been constructed during a time period when the Germany of the 1940s didn't yet exist as a nation, made for a king of Prussia, and his son had willingly given it away to Peter the Great. The Romanov royal family had then made significant alterations and additions to it over the ensuing centuries. At the very least, the room as it stood in 1942 was a hybrid creation, and certainly it legally belonged to Russia. Saying it was German would be like the French turning around today and saying that the Statue of Liberty belongs to them because it was largely financed and built by the French and given as a gift to the US. I can't imagine that would go down too well with the Americans. The room remained on display in Königsberg Castle until at least 1943. The following August, Allied air raids began on the city, which destroyed much of the castle, though basement areas survived. On the 2nd of September 1944, Rode reported that the Amber Room was undamaged except for 6 plates of the plinth. It may have already been dismantled and packed up by this stage, or else quickly packed up at that point. The sources I've looked at give conflicting information on this issue, but I tend to think, given the damage the castle sustained in the air raids, that it was already off the walls and in crates by then. We aren't sure what happened next either, as there is further disagreement as to whether the room remained crated up in the castle or was removed from it. The German soldier in charge of Königsberg at the time, and who might well have known what had happened to the room, was Erich Koch. However, he abandoned his post in January 1945 as the Red Army approached, and was later captured in Hamburg in 1949 by the British. We'll return to him in a moment. By the time the Russians occupied what was left of the castle in April 1945, having also shelled it first, destroying it even further, all traces of the Amber Room were gone, and almost nothing of it has been found by investigators since. Again, we'll come back to this point in a minute. Rode and his wife remained in Königsberg and were interrogated by the Soviets, who wanted to know what had happened to the room. Soon, however, both died under mysterious circumstances and right before they were due to be questioned again about the room. Officially, they had suddenly expired overnight from typhus, which was then rampant in the city. However, their bodies and the doctor who signed the death certificates couldn't be traced. Decades passed, and it seemed that nothing of the Amber Room would ever be seen again. Erich Koch was handed over to the Poles, convicted of war crimes, and eventually died in a Polish prison in 1986, aged 90, without ever having revealed anything about the room's fate. Then, in 1997, German investigators got wind of someone trying to sell a piece of the Amber Room. After raiding the offices of the seller's lawyer, they found, in Bremen, one of the Florian mosaic panels mentioned earlier, this one depicting the senses of smell and touch. The seller was the son of a deceased soldier and claimed not to know where his father had acquired the piece. Soon afterwards, a wooden chest of drawers which had sat in the room was also discovered in Germany. Both appear to have been stolen at the time the room was being packed or shipped from Catherine's palace to Königsberg, as they are missing from photos of the room taken while it was in the castle. They were ultimately returned to Russia in April 2000 in a kind of prisoner exchange for art, as at the same time Russia returned numerous paintings to Germany which had been taken by the Soviets during World War II. There are many theories as to what became of the Amber Room. One story which does the rounds is that a woman named Liesl Am, who knew Alfred Roed, was taken into the castle basement with him the day after air raids on the 30th of August 1944 and shown a charred, honey-coloured mass, which she said he told her was the remains of the Amber Room. This has been discounted as true though, as the fire would have burned so hot that the amber, which melts at 300 degrees Celsius, would have been reduced to ash. It would also have produced an overwhelming smell like burning incense, which Liesl Am and others in the city couldn't have failed to notice or remember. Furthermore, it contradicts Roed's own statement on the 2nd of September that the room remained virtually intact. Another idea is that it was placed on a ship, the Wilhelm Gustloff, which was one of many boats being used to evacuate German soldiers and civilians across the Baltic Sea as Russia's Red Army approached in January 1945. This ship was torpedoed and sunk in the Baltic on the 30th of January with a loss of over 9,000 lives, and perhaps, some say, the Amber Room too. The wreck of the Wilhelm Gustloff has been extensively dived in the decades since it sank, however, and no trace of the room has been found. In fact, it was attracting so much attention that in 2006 it was made illegal to dive within 500 metres of it, as it's designated as a war grave. Some think the room may still be buried somewhere under Königsberg in an abandoned and now lost tunnel or basement, once accessible from the castle. Others believe that it made it out of the building and is hidden somewhere beneath the German city of Weimar. In 1991, the former president of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, announced that he knew the room was buried in East Germany, but despite searches, nothing was found. In the later 1990s, there were also investigations made of a lagoon near the town of Neringa in Lithuania, where SS officers were supposedly seen burying wooden crates near the end of the war, at a time when the water levels were lower. And a silver mine 100 kilometres south of Berlin, where former SS officers claimed it had been interred, was also searched. Nothing was found in either of these locations, however, or indeed anywhere else that has been checked. The simplest and to my mind most likely explanation is that the crates containing the amber panels and other objects were destroyed either during the Allied bombing, Soviet shelling or resulting fires at Königsberg Castle in 1944 or 1945. This was the conclusion reached by a Soviet investigator sent into the city just after the war, and by modern investigators Adrian Levy and Kathy Scott Clark, whose book on the room's fate I'll leave linked in the description box. They had access to declassified KGB and Stasi records, which suggested that the Soviets inadvertently destroyed the room in 1945 in the process of seizing the remains of the castle. There are issues with these theories, though. As I mentioned, if it burned, the smell would have been intense and would likely have drifted over the whole city, so that surely there would be accounts of it from those who were present at the time. If it was blown to smithereens, we might expect to have stories of shards of amber being found in the castle ruins, but we don't. Of course, this information could have been suppressed, and no further checks can be made of the castle's remains, as Königsberg became the Russian city of Kaliningrad after the war, and the shell of the castle was blown up by the Soviets in 1968. I therefore live in hope that I'll be proved wrong in my suspicion that the room was destroyed, and that one day it will show up. If it is still out there, estimates of its modern financial worth run into hundreds of millions of US dollars. We have to consider what condition it might be in by now, however, having been dismantled and put back together so many times and kept in who knows what kind of conditions since the 1940s. Even if it wasn't destroyed in Königsberg, it may have disintegrated in the decades since. Fortunately, though we may never see the real Amber Room again, we can still get a great idea of what it was like to see it in situ in Russia. In 2003, a reconstructed Amber Room, which you've seen pictures of during this video, was opened in Catherine Palace to mark the 300th anniversary of the founding of the city of St Petersburg. It had taken nearly a quarter of a century to build, cost $11 million and was partly funded by a German gas company. As you can see from photographs, it is absolutely stunning, and though not the original, it's likely just as beautiful to look at. But tell me, what do you think happened to the Amber Room? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, please also give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel with notifications switched on so you never miss an upload. If you love a good historical mystery, I have a playlist dedicated to them, which you might want to check out next. It includes videos on the mysterious skeleton lake in the Indian Himalayas, the dancing plagues which afflicted early modern Europe, and the story of an Irish countess who supposedly lived to be 140 years old. Whatever you choose, please enjoy, and until next time, keep learning.